The scripture reading is from Psalm chapter 19. Psalm chapter 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and the words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Who can discern his errors? Declare me innocent from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not be dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
Good morning, church. So this is our second lesson in our series, Fear Not. And I hope that last week really spoke to you and that God has been encouraging you through this week, not only through each other, but through his word. As we get into our second lesson this morning, I want you to keep your Bibles open in Psalm 19. But we mentioned something last week, and that is that there was a statement made that the only certainty is uncertainty, right? And yet if I had to say that to you this morning, would that be a true statement for you and I to make? The only certainty is uncertainty. I'm glad that many of you are shaking your heads this morning. Because that's not a true statement, is it? The idea of living with certainty means living without doubt, or for there to be no doubt. And as we consider who we are this morning in Christ, we need to be certain of this life, in that we are saved and that we will see God when we breathe our last. Amen? And that is all we need to be certain about. It doesn't matter what happens from day to day, but what does matter is how focused we are on the fact that we are saved and that our God is coming to get us. Now, how can you and I really be certain and be sure of life? Well, I don't know if you see on the slide here this morning, but there's a word called steadfast, right? And basically, this word means to not be able to be moved or immovable, right? That's the easiest way for us to define it this morning. Both Hebrew and Greek words mean the same thing or have at least the same idea attached to it. The Hebrew word defines it as an ever unchanged content. An ever unchanged content. Something that cannot be moved. The Greek word defines it as a support or foundation. And it has with it, or it carries with it, the idea of strength, stability, and once again, something that cannot be moved. And when we talk about this word, we're talking about our God this morning. We're talking about a God that does not move. We're talking about a God that cannot be moved because He is steadfast. Because He is steadfast, you and I can be certain this morning about this life that we live. We can also be certain about His promises. So when we talk about a God that is steadfast, well, what does that mean this morning? Well, it means that we have a God that does not change, right? Because He doesn't change, it means His word doesn't change. Therefore, you and I can be sure about the things that He speaks to us in this book that you have in front of you this morning, and the promises and the truth that it carries with it. Still with me? Based on that alone, you and I need fear not. We can be certain and we can have a confidence in our walk while on this earth because of a God that is immovable. He does not change. In Malachi 3:6, God says that I'm a God that does not change. He's a God that does not change. In 1 Corinthians 15:54, it talks about our faith, and our faith in Him needs to be immovable. Now, I don't know where you're at this morning, the things that you struggle with, but what God is calling us to this morning is the life of confidence. And the only way that we can live in confidence is for us to be so sure about who we are in Him and the promises that He has made to us through this book that you're looking at this morning. Amen? And the only way that we can become more confident is for us to be spending more time in this book. And I don't know about you, but when I think of the idea of steadfastness, I do think of a rock, or a solid building, a foundation, a pillar that holds things together. And that is our God this morning. Not only does He hold the whole universe in His hand, but He holds our lives together. Now, how can we be sure of a God? Well, if we look at Psalm 19, which declares that there is a God. And church, I want to say something this morning, that it takes more faith for you and I to believe in a God that does not exist than for us to believe in a God that does exist. In fact, there's more evidence, not only through our apologetics, but through our archaeological studies, to prove that this book is authentic. And because this book is authentic and has been proved as being authentic, this book also speaks about a God who has written the book, right? Therefore, we have a God that is steadfast. Notice what Psalm 19 says. It says, the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and the expanse is declaring the work of His hands. Day to day pours forth speech, night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words, their voice is not heard. How many of you have heard the sun speak? How many of you have heard the moon speak? And yet, what is the text saying to us this morning? That their actions speak so loud that they need not say anything. Because the fact that it's there reveals God's glory, reveals that there is a Creator and there is a God that you and I can be confident in. And we should have enough confidence in our God and be able to walk in victory this morning. Because the last time I checked, the God that I serve, the God that you serve, He has spoken everything into existence. Based on that alone, I need not fear. What happens when He decides to move with His hand? Church? What happens then? If when He speaks, things happen, what happened? What happens when He uses His mighty right hand to move? You and I this morning can be confident, and we need fear not. Romans chapter 1 and verse 20 reads as follows. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. If I had to ask you this morning, how powerful, how awesome is your God, on a scale of 1 to 10, I hope that your answer would be 15. Okay, smarty pants. Ephesians 2:10 reveals how God created you and I for a specific purpose, and that is to reveal His good works. As we look at both these texts, the idea of something being made, the idea of God's craftsmanship, the idea of God's masterpiece is revealed in these texts. And the reason that I want to lay this foundation for you this morning, because it's easy for us to say, trust in God, right? Trust in a God that you cannot see. Because we believe and we trust more in the things that we can see than in the things that we cannot see, right? Because that is how our minds have been conditioned, and that is how the world has trained us to think. And yet God tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7, we walk not by sight, but we walk by faith. You see, we don't always need to see everything. We need to trust. And yet, based on what we've just looked at this morning, creation speaks of a God that exists. A God that you and I can be so sure of, that is steadfast and does not move. Now let's look at the idea of His Word this morning and why this is so important to and for us. So His Word not only strengthens us, it gives us instruction. And throughout His Word it teaches us and shares with us and encourages us about the idea that you and I should not fear, even though we have a tendency to want to fear because of this uncertainty that you and I face in our daily walk with God and the situations that we may face. As we look at verses 7 through 13, the text defines a few things for us that we'll go through. But here's the thing, God's Word is not bound by this pandemic, is it, church? It's not bound by this pandemic. It's not bound by disasters, and it's not even bound by your lack of faith, my lack of faith. I think that's something for us to consider this morning and encourage us as His people. And so because His Word is not bound, we can be sure and we can walk in faith, being reassured of the life we live in Him. But notice a couple of things as we look at verses 7 through 13. Notice in the way God's Word is described. It talks about His Word being His law, right? And it says that His law reveals certain things to us. So it reveals His will for us and to us. Notice that it talks about how His law is perfect, right? How it revives the soul. How in need of that are we today? Notice that it talks about His Word being right or righteous, depending on the version that you have. Notice it talks about how it makes the paths clear or straight. Notice how it refers to the idea of His Word or His law being true. indicating the idea of God always being a just God. As I look at this morning, I hope that it encourages you as it does me, for me to know that this word that we have is so authentic. Because it's so authentic, I can trust in every word that it says. Do you remember how many times the phrase fear not is used, church? Do you remember from last week? 365 times, right? 365 times. Based on the fact that we all agree here this morning that this word is authentic, right? Can we trust in that? That God is telling you to fear not. Whatever it is that you're struggling with, whatever it is that you're going through, whether it's COVID, when it's the idea of someone touching you with it, with COVID that is, whether it's just some challenges that you're facing, God is asking you to not fear. What does it produce? It's no different to worry, is it, church? It's no different. In fact, if I fear something happening and it does happen, how does that help me? What has it accomplished? And what if I fear and nothing happens? What have I accomplished? But we spoke last week of how fear distracts us, and that is what Satan wants. He wants to distract you from the path that you walk. He wants to distract you from the goal that God has set before you. He wants to distract you from the ministry that He has called you to. The next thing I want to talk about this morning now, I couldn't find pictures of all of us, even though I really tried. And I went stalking on your Facebook pages. So I got these pictures from there. But I want you to just look at these pictures for just a second before I make the next point. These were some gems. The reason I posted these pictures instead of just getting something off the net is that we're talking about ourselves here this morning, right? We're talking about how this word, how this lesson series impacts you and I, as much as what there's those who have tuned in. But we're speaking first and foremost to ourselves here this morning as God's people. And so I want to talk to you about the aspect of conviction this morning. Notice as we read verses 14 what the text says to us. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. As the psalmist writes this, there's a certain conviction that he has about his God, right? And what does he say about his God? He says that his God is his rock. Do you see the idea of steadfastness? He also says that his God is what? His Redeemer. It's the idea of God healing, repairing, whether it be brokenness, whether it be situations in your life. And when we look at the original text, there's an emphasis that's there that we might miss when we just read over it. Notice again, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. My question to you this morning, as you saw yourself up there this morning for some of us, what is your conviction this morning about the God that you serve? Do you fear not? Or are you living in fear? And if you are living in fear, I want to suggest something to you. That maybe you don't know, maybe you don't trust your God in the way David writes in Psalm 19. Do you believe this morning that He's your rock? I'll say it one more time. Sometimes I know that you're not always on the same page as me. Do you believe that He's your rock? Yes. And if you believe that this morning, then what you are testifying to this morning as you say yes, is that you're acknowledging that you have a God that is steadfast. And that means that you have a God that cannot be moved. So you need not fear. Because if He tells you that He's with you, then guess what? Nothing is going to move Him from you, right? Do you believe that He's your Redeemer? Then you are testifying to the aspect that He will heal whatever brokenness, whatever issues, whatever challenges you're dealing with right now, that He will come and heal that and renew whatever it is that you're struggling with. O Lord, my rock and my Redeemer. There's no doubt in his mind as he writes this morning. No doubt whatsoever. But he knows the God that he serves. Church, there's been so many different things said, right, over the last couple of months about this pandemic. In fact, the focus has been so much on the pandemic that I wonder if we maybe didn't miss a couple of things along the line. When I say we, I mean us as God's people. You see, sometimes we've got to be very careful about the testimony that we share to the world. See, if we claim this morning that He's our rock, that He's our Redeemer, that is what must be the testimony in the way we live our lives. Amen? Now, if I claim that God is my rock, that He's my Redeemer, yet I live in fear, what am I really saying to the world? What am I really saying to the world? I'm saying, well, I'm not quite sure if this word is authentic or not. I'm not sure if what's being said in this book is truth or not. In fact, what I am saying is, I don't know if I've got that much faith in the God that I'm saying is God of all the earth. And so when we spread false testimony, it impacts our witness, right? It impacts our witness. And we need to understand this morning as God's people that there is a huge responsibility placed on us. Because when He calls us in Matthew 28, He calls us as what we know to be this Great Commission, right? Not only is He calling us to speak truth, because it allows people and prisoners to be set free, right? Captives, it sets captives free. Spiritually, that is, right? But He's also telling us that we need to continuously teach His truth. But if I don't believe it even, what sort of impact will I be making in the lives of those that I am trying to reach out to? Let us as God's people continue to lead the way in this pandemic by being a calming presence in this chaos. Do you think you can do that? Do you think you can do that? And how are you going to do that? By remembering that He's your what? He's your rock. And that He's your? Do you know why this is so crucial? In case if you get nothing else out of this lesson this morning, listen up here. Do you know why these two things are so important and crucial for us to note this morning. Because firstly, once again, by acknowledging that He's our rock, we're claiming that we have a God that is strong, that is powerful, that is awesome, that cannot be moved, right? That's the same God that we go out and testify about. And if I truly believe that, I'm going to live in that way and people will see, right? The second thing this morning is that if I am convicted of the fact that He's my Redeemer, then I will never allow Satan to have a foothold in my life ever by allowing me to doubt who I am in Christ. Because the minute you and I begin to doubt who we are and our status and where we're at because of the things that happen in our life and the times we fall short, right? When we focus on that and we forget that He's our Redeemer, it hinders our walk. And it stops us from sharing the testimony that He's our rock. Does that make sense this morning? And so He's calling us this morning to a confidence, and He's saying, fear not. I want you to go with me to Psalm chapter 18. Let's read from verse 30. Psalm 18, verses 30 to 36. As for God, His way is blameless. The word of the Lord is tried. He is a shield to all who take refuge in Him. For who is God but the Lord, and who is a rock except our God? The God who girds me with strength and makes my way blameless. He makes my feet like hinds' feet and sets me upon my high places. He trains my hands for battle so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have also given me the shield of your salvation, and your right hand upholds me, and your gentleness makes me great. You enlarge my steps under me, and my feet have not slipped. I hope that you notice the confidence in which the psalm is written. And I think as you look at the text, it's once again clear for you to see the idea of God being steadfast, but also of God being a redeemer, right? It's clear as we look at these verses this morning that this is brought out over and over again. Based on the fact that God is steadfast, that He's immovable, and you said this morning, not me, you said you agree with that, right? Because I don't know if you know, when you said amen, you agreed with that statement this morning. And so I'm going to get you to do one more thing before we close. I want you to remember that God does not change, right? Your situations, your circumstances, your environments may change. But He doesn't change. And so say this with me. My God never changes. My God never changes. As you go this week, this is the confidence you can have. You and I serve a God who does not change. Because He does not change, we can live with certainty. Whatever the world is telling you about these are uncertain times, no, these are certain times. And you know why they're certain times? Because we serve a God who is steadfast. Amen? So no more listening to this idea of uncertain times. These are real and certain times for us. And do you remember what we spoke about last week? We said that God has prepared us for this time. Let's not miss our moment. Let's stand as we sing.